Cormac McCarthy and David Lynch are two of the best artists in their respective mediums. And today I'm going to be showing you guys how they have lived parallel lives in terms of how they have emitted their light and their darkness in their creative work. So I'm not going to play hide the cookie with any of you guys right now. Instead, we're going to talk about the biggest parallel between McCarthy and Lynch, which is their first big creative project was the exact same thing. And when we look at Lynch's Eraserhead and Cormac McCarthy's Outer Dark, they were their first big independent creative projects because, like most artists, they did a couple smaller things before they stepped in to longer form works. With Lynch, he did some short films in Philadelphia and eventually came out to the American Film Institute and secured the funding, time, and space to start to film Eraserhead. And McCarthy wrote some short stories and started a novel called The Orchard Keeper in college and sent it to a slush pile at Random House, and it basically got published with little to no resistance by the editors. So Outer Dark for McCarthy was his first big work as an independent person, living out on his own with his wife, and the same could be said for David Lynch. And so in 1967, David Lynch marries his wife Peggy, and very soon thereafter, he gets his first wife Peggy pregnant. And around this time, he starts coming up with this idea for a movie called Eraserhead. And in 1961, Cormac McCarthy marries Lee Holman. And funny enough, about a year later, the same exact timeline as Lynch, she has a baby. And as soon as she has her first baby, Cormac tells her, you need to go get to work. You need to go get a job. So she's working 40 hours a week, right in that very sensitive postpartum period, and she's not making enough money. She's being a waitress or something. And McCarthy has not got any money for the Orchard Keeper yet, even though it's been approved. And they said, okay, if you make some edits, we'll give you an advance. And so McCarthy tells her, hey, I know you just had a baby, but I need you to get a second job because we don't have enough money right now. And this obviously resulted in a bunch of fighting and a bunch of problems in their marriage. And a couple weeks after she had their first child and only child, he started writing Outer Dark. And we know this because Outer Dark is the only first draft we have of any McCarthy novel. And this may seem like nothing, but the problem is that both stories, Outer Dark and Eraserhead, are about the anxieties of a male protagonist about having a family, about having a baby, and the dark, nightmarish reality, the unconscious coming out because of the guilt, anxiety, and problems stemming from that. In Eraserhead, we have this demonic manifestation who is tormenting Henry Spencer, and we have these supernatural elements like the lady in the radiator and whatnot. And when we look at Outer Dark, we have a male protagonist named Cola and supernatural elements all throughout the novel, especially the triune in there. And both the protagonists, Cola and Henry, are obviously representing David and Cormac. Cormac so much so that he named his son Colin, and he named the character in the book Cola, like not too much variation there. Also similar in their novels, the lady ends up leaving. The wife or girlfriend, whatever we want to call her, in Eraserhead leaves, and then Cola's sister Rinty in Outer Dark leaves. And that kind of creates the downfall and the darkness of the novel when the female leaves. And this is similar to exactly what happens in both of their lives. Right, a couple months after Cormac McCarthy started Outer Dark, Lee Holman fled with their son Colin and moved to Wyoming for basically the rest of her life. A couple years into filming Eraserhead, David Lynch's first wife, Peggy, and what's crazy, while I was doing research on this, David Lynch's, I think, fourth wife just filed for divorce from him, but Peggy also leaves him. Another similar parallel is that both Lynch and McCarthy get with new women during this time. To restore some of this darkness, this weird path that they are on, they once again turn to women to fill in the aspects of their soul that are missing, which is totally a bad move. And David and Cormac almost immediately get remarried. David Lynch with Mary Fisk, and then McCarthy with Annie Delisle. And actually, the end of both novels is basically very similar. At the end of Eraserhead, Henry kills the baby, or the baby consumes him, and he ends up with the girl of his dreams. But there's this death of the baby and the death of himself. And when we look at Outer Dark, there's a very similar thing happening. At the end of Outer Dark, the triune, which is really a manifestation of Cola's guilt, his unconscious, because if you track that novel, and in the italicized sections, they were once in nightmares, once not in reality, and they manifest into reality eventually, kind of following Cola's descent into darkness and killing his baby and whatnot. And at the end of the novel, Cola finds that his babies have been cannibalized by the triune, or his baby has been cannibalized by the triune. And what's wild is that both were kind of working with these ideas within a 5-year timeline. McCarthy in like 63, 64 starts working, and this idea of Outer Dark comes out. And David Lynch in 67 it comes up with his idea, and it takes Lynch much longer to execute. McCarthy publishes in 68 and Lynch releases in 77, but both knew where the story was going to be going and kind of the feeling it was going to entail. And for both of them, it was a massive stride in their artistic careers. For David Lynch, it obviously brought him mainstream success and landed him the Elephant Man role, a directing role, which led to much bigger opportunities and everything we know now. But for Cormac McCarthy, he didn't find very much commercial success. I think only 2,500 copies of that novel sold, but it did refine what skills and ideas that he was going to use for the rest of his career. When we look at the transition from The Orchard Keeper to Outer Dark, it's massive. When you read The Orchard Keeper, it has a different style than you could say any other Cormac McCarthy novel. It is somewhat tropey, including his language. The language is much more aggressive. If you go read that prose, if you like McCarthy prose, he goes crazy in that. He's like trying to show everyone that he is the best stylist. But in Outer Dark, he kind of mutes himself a little bit and lets the story work for itself and moves into imagery and symbolism. And the same could be said for David Lynch. David Lynch was exploring things. If you go watch Lynch's early films like The Alphabet and some of the other ones, they were instrumental and there were ideas that he was working with, the same in The Orchard Keeper. But in Eraserhead, you see Lynch doing things that he'll do for the rest of his career. And the same could be said with Outer Dark. And this is stemming from this major problem that these postmodernists, because, you know, you hate to say it, but McCarthy in Outer Dark is writing a postmodernist novel. It's fronted as a Southern Gothic novel that us men now like, but it's a frame novel that's having nightmares manifest from nightmares into reality and working on multiple timelines, and there's layering and all this and dreams and all these other things. And if you look at Eraserhead, it's obviously because of the time period and when it started and Lynch living in Los Angeles, pretty postmodernist too. And so these young men, and this was a big thing in the late 60s, and Cormac was a little bit older, were starting to refute what their parents who were in World War II or from the classical modernist times were imparting on them. And there was this massive shift away. And both attacked the family, the idea of the family, and this kind of beautiful glimmer, because there had been attacks on the family before. If you look at modernist literature, there's this kind of tragic nature to some of Hemingway's stories and honestly almost all literature, but it was never that dark. But McCarthy in Outer Dark moves into this Gnostic outer darkness. And Lynch also is sitting in this zone that's the inverse of what we think the family structure is. So another great parallel between McCarthy and David Lynch, which I don't hear people talk about enough, is that, and probably because I'm the only Cormac McCarthy channel and David Lynch channel out there, I actually have a video up here. You guys should go check that out. It's on David Lynch's favorite books. I actually have a couple of David Lynch videos on the channel because I actually view him as a very great writer. He wrote a lot of his movies, his TV shows, and obviously there's some duds in there. But he does take the craft of writing very seriously. So another thing that they both don't do is talk about their work. If you ask David Lynch what happened in Mulholland Drive, what did that mean? He'll say Philadelphia, or he'll give some like random response. And the same goes for Cormac McCarthy. Both refuse to talk about their work, and both kind of are very interested in the unconscious. If you ask Cormac McCarthy, how do you make your work? Unconscious. David Lynch, unconscious. And they feel that by talking about their work, they are essentially ruining what they are doing. And as I said at the start of the video, I feel like they are, for sure, especially in terms of contemporary directors and writers, in the top 5 and easily the top 10 in their respective fields. And both of them not refusing to talk about their work and like be egocentric and like telling people know what this means is really big for critics. That's why, you know, when you look at Cormac McCarthy, the scholarship community and channels like this are so so passionate because we no one can tell us that we are wrong. And the same when it goes to Lynch criticism. I heard that Blue Velvet has had more papers in film school written about it than any other movie ever. And what makes it even better is that both authors love to sit in the symbolic. Lynch a little bit more so, but when we look at McCarthy's work with the italicized sections, all those are encoded symbols that need to be unpacked and understood. And one last parallel, which I think is pretty funny, is that everyone's favorite Cormac McCarthy adaptation is No Country for Old Men. And now that I've gone a little bit older and watched it 4 or 5 times, I've liked it less and less every time I've seen it. But it came out 5 months before No Country for Old Men did, and David Lynch was campaigning for Laura Dern to get a nomination for Best Actress at the same Academy Awards that No Country for Old Men won, all those awards. And Lynch even went as far to sitting in the middle of Hollywood with a cow to advertise for Laura. And she ended up not getting the nomination, but I wonder what would have happened if Cormac McCarthy and David Lynch and the Coen brothers were all in the same building and probably all seated very close to each other. Maybe we would have ended up in some alternative universe where David Lynch directed Outer Dark.